I was scrolling through my feed the other morning, right after the news about Charlie Kirk broke. I expected the usual shock, perhaps some, heated political debates. But instead, I found something that actually made my stomach turn. It wasn't the report of the violence itself. It was the comment sections. People were practically throwing digital parties. I saw one user post a cheers emoji right next to a headline mentioning he's left behind 2 young children.
Wow.
There was this palpable, giddy sense of satisfaction, like their team had just scored a touchdown in a game where the ball happened to be a human life. When I replied to one guy, asking if he really felt okay celebrating a father being shot in the neck, he didn't offer a rational argument or talk about policy.
Of course not.
He just sent back a meme of a trash can wearing a red hat and wrote, "One less monster." To him, that was the ironclad justification. The man wasn't a human being anymore. He was just a data point for the other side.
Yeah.
But then the observation got even weirder. I clicked on this guy's profile. It was filled with posts about universal compassion, mental health awareness, and ending the cycle of hate. Just days ago, he was preaching about the sanctity of life and the need for more empathy in the world.
Right. The hypocrisy.
Yet, the moment the victim was someone who didn't align with his tribe, all those high-minded values simply evaporated. That instantaneous shift from a self-proclaimed humanitarian to someone laughing at a murder left me stunned. It wasn't about logic or even personal grievance. It was a total surrender to the group.
A total surrender.
It made me realize that we're living in a world that is effectively drunk on tribalism, sprawling in its own filth, yet still clutching the bottle. We've reached a point where the color of the jersey matters more than the person bleeding out inside it. It's a quiet, intellectual death that's happening everywhere, from the streets of London to the comments on a dating video, and it's stripping away the one thing that actually makes us human. That opening narrative, as unsettling as it is, really frames our mission for this deep dive. The behavior we're seeing, that ability to, flip a switch and instantly celebrate cruelty when the victim wears the wrong jersey, it feels too rapid.
It's too primal.
Too primal, exactly, to be explained just by bad politics or poor manners. It suggests a fundamental failure of our ancient psychology in a brand new environment. So our mission today is to unpack this modern moral crisis, not as a political or cultural failure, but as an evolutionary one. We're looking at sources covering evolutionary psychology, the origins of coalitional behavior, and how that ancient wiring is being spectacularly mismatched and, frankly, hacked in the digital age.
Yeah.
We want to understand why our Stone Age brains are failing so dramatically in a space age environment.
And I think that term you use, intellectual death, is incredibly accurate. What you observed is the manifestation of powerful, evolved psychological mechanisms being hijacked. It's important to acknowledge upfront that the quick delineation between us and them and the fierce impulse to protect the group at all costs were once highly adaptive for survival. They kept our ancestors alive.
Right, there was a reason for it.
There's a very good reason for it. But now, in the novel context of the Anthropocene, they are generating severe dysfunction. Before we can begin to address the toxicity of the present, we absolutely must understand the original function of the tribal instinct. To start at the beginning, we have to look through the lens of evolutionary psychology, or EP. EP isn't just a fun way to theorize about the past. It is a serious theoretical approach that examines human cognition and behavior from a modern evolutionary perspective. It posits that the human mind, like every other organ, is a product of evolution.
So we aren't talking about a blank slate brain that learns everything from culture. We're talking about a brain that arrived with a specific pre-programmed architecture.
Precisely. If we look at the brain, it's not just one generalized problem-solving mechanism. Evolutionary psychologists argue that the brain is structured into specialized functions, often referred to as cognitive modules or psychological adaptations, each having evolved to solve a distinct, recurrent, adaptive problem that our ancestors faced.
Okay, so a cognitive module. What is that exactly?
Think of it like a piece of complex computer hardware. You don't use the same software to run a spreadsheet that you use to render a 3D graphic. They require different specialized systems. The brain's the same way.
That analogy helps a lot. So the brain isn't just one big hard drive. It has specialized processors.
Absolutely. Consider things that are universally hardwired. We have specialized systems for language acquisition. Children absorb grammar rules almost automatically. We have powerful specialized systems for things like incest avoidance, foraging mechanisms, and crucially, alliance tracking mechanisms.
Alliance tracking. You mean like keeping score of who's on my team?
In a sense, yes. For instance, detecting cheaters within a cooperative system is a domain-specific mechanism. We are far better at solving logical puzzles when those puzzles are framed as spotting someone who violated a social contract rather than spotting a generic logical error.
That's fascinating.
It is. This whole suite of adaptations explains the profound universality of certain behaviors and constraints across all human cultures. We are born predisposed to solve certain types of problems. Now, to ground these adaptations, we must talk about the environment they were designed for. The environment of evolutionary adaptedness, or the EEA.
EEA, right. And that's not like a specific cave or jungle, is it?
No, exactly. That's a common misconception. It's not. The EEA is defined as the set of historically recurring selection pressures that formed a given adaptation. For our psychological adaptations, the relevant EEA corresponds mostly to the Pleistocene epoch,
Which spans from, what, about 2.6 million years ago?
all the way up to the dawn of agriculture about 12,000 years ago.
That's a massive span of time, and it underscores how recently our current reality arrived.
It does. The critical insight here is that the human mind you and I are using right now, the one processing information, calculating risk, and determining who is friend or foe, is essentially a Stone Age mind.
A Stone Age mind.
The majority of our psychological mechanisms are adapted to solve the reproductive and survival problems frequently encountered in those Pleistocene hunter-gatherer environments. Our ancestors lived in small nomadic tribes or small band hunter-gatherer groups. These were highly cohesive cultures with stable context for identity and meaning.
And the small group size is what matters when we look at our modern crisis.
It is the defining feature. These groups numbered perhaps only a couple of hundred people at most, often significantly less. Crucially, a large percentage of the people in the band were relatives or had highly stable long-term relationships where reputation was immediately and constantly monitored.
So your reputation was everything.
Everything. This scale is the crucial data point when we compare it to modern global society, where we interact with thousands of strangers daily.
And here's where the human duality comes into play. Because the sources show that the tribal structure demanded both extreme cooperation and extreme competition simultaneously.
That tension is the engine of human evolution. The need to cooperate fiercely within the small band led to the evolution of incredibly pro-social instincts. This is the good side. Love, friendship, nurturance, a deep sense of fairness, cooperation, and even self-sacrifice for the group.
The things that hold society together.
These adaptations are what bind human societies together and allowed us to survive in harsh environments.
But the flip side is that they were cooperating specifically to compete better against other groups for scarce resources.
Exactly. Competition for resources, often escalating into violent intergroup conflict, was not a fringe activity. It was a major factor shaping human psychology. Archaeological and fossil evidence of warfare dates back hundreds of thousands of years.
And the numbers are just staggering.
Estimates based on skeletal trauma suggest that 20% to 30% of ancestral men died as a direct result of intergroup violence. In that brutal ancestral context, any psychological adaptation that enhanced your group's survival, even if it involved ruthlessly harming or dehumanizing individuals in other groups, was selectively advantageous for your own survival and reproductive success.
So it's a feature, not a bug.
It's a feature. Our toolkit includes both the noble pro-social motives and these darker ultimate motives. Intergroup competition for dominance, strict boundary definition, and an innate primal fear of social exclusion from the group. The foundational role of intergroup conflict brings us directly to the tribal instinct hypothesis. This hypothesis is crucial because it posits that much of our social psychology, especially how we categorize and behave toward large groups, is the evolutionary residue of a long history of intense intergroup rivalry and competition.
So deeply shaped our coalitionary thinking.
Deeply.
If that hypothesis is correct, then our instinct to divide the world into us and them is not learned. It's a default operating system.
That's the interpretation. And social psychology provides massive support for this innate tribal psychology. Humans possess an immediate automatic tendency to quickly distinguish in-group from out-group members.
It's automatic.
We form deep emotional attachments and exhibit profound, often irrational loyalty to symbolic groups, be they sports teams, political parties, or even minimal groups defined by flipping a coin. Conversely, we're wired to be suspicious of and often actively discriminate against out-group members.
But wait, if tribalism leads to such intense conflict and resource drain and potentially death, as we discussed, why didn't evolution filter out the extreme xenophobia? Isn't that counterproductive for overall human survival?
That is the core paradox, the very thing that makes human cooperation so unique. The initial adaptive function of the tribe was, surprisingly, positive. It allowed us to bootstrap cooperation among strangers.
It solved the problem of scale.
It solved the problem of scale. Most social species, like chimpanzees, operate strictly on a face-to-face ledger of interaction, relying on direct knowledge and kinship. As a rule, chimpanzees fear and often violently attack strangers. Humans, however, evolve the capacity to extend trust far beyond our immediate family.
So the tribe is essentially the psychological structure that allows us to trust a stranger because they share a symbol with us.
Exactly. The tribe is defined as a supergroup, an intersubjective belief network. It's a cognitive reality that exists only because we all agree it exists. This network uses shared symbols, a flag, a uniform, a codex of laws, a shared mythology to signal alliance.
So by wearing the same jersey, you're saying?
You are communicating. I am your ally. I share your sacred values. Let's cooperate. This ability for symbolic social coordination is what allowed our ancestors to form larger, more effective defense and hunting parties, which gave them a crucial survival edge.
And that explains why those tribal identities can be so fluid, which I find incredibly fascinating. We aren't just one identity, we stack them.
We do. Human tribal identities are symbolic, not rigid, and we context-dependently move in and out of many of them very quickly, depending on the immediate threat or opportunity.
The baseball example in this source is perfect for this.
It's a classic example. The Mets and Phillies rivalry. In that specific context, they are fierce rivals. But when the news broke in 2011 about the death of Osama bin Laden, the conflict identity was instantaneously overwritten by a superordinate coalitionary identity, USA, USA, USA.
The switch happened in seconds.
In seconds. The mind's programming is simply responding to the most salient threat or opportunity in the immediate environment. However, that same coalitionary thinking requires boundaries, and those boundaries are often drawn with extreme prejudice. Ethnocentrism and xenophobia are universal adaptations precisely because defining the in-group requires defining what it is not.
You can't have an S's without a them.
You can't. This process inherently leads to classifying others as them or potential enemies and historically results in a denial of equal respect or even full humanity to outgroup members.
I find the ethnographic examples profoundly disturbing because they show how deeply ingrained this cognitive boundary is, that some cultures literally define foreigners as non-human.
The examples are stark. Consider the Kung-san of the Kalahari. Their name for themselves literally translates to the real people, and in their language, the words for bad and foreign are one and the same.
Wow. An unconscious equation.
It is an unconscious equating of outside with threat or moral failing, but the example of the Asmat people of Indonesia and New Guinea is perhaps the most visceral. They refer to all outsiders as mano, which translates to the edible ones.
The edible ones, that's chilling.
Once that identity boundary is successfully drawn, the outgroup can be placed outside the moral circle, making violence or even cannibalism conceptually permissible. It's the ultimate evidence that the initial step toward violence is the psychological act of dehumanization.
And this leads to the internal governance mechanism, strong reciprocity and altruistic punishment. Being a good tribe member doesn't just mean being nice, it means being willing to punish others.
It means we are predisposed to be fiercely cooperative with in-group members and simultaneously more nasty to out-group members. But internally, we must punish those who violate the rules, even when that punishment is personally costly. That's altruistic punishment.
Why is it altruistic?
It seems altruistic because you expend energy or risk retaliation to punish a cheater, but in an ancestral context, it was highly adaptive. Engaging in costly third-party punishment signaled to everyone else that you were committed to the group's shared codex and had high moral fiber.
It's reputation management disguised as righteous anger.
Exactly. This commitment conferred immense reputational benefits and increased status. Studies show that punishers of internal cheaters are highly valued, often viewed as more trustworthy and, crucially, more attractive as mates or cooperation partners.
So punishing the wicked was good for you.
Punishing the wicked, evolutionarily speaking, was a selfish pathway to social success and higher reproductive fitness. This impulse to punish and signal virtue is a key piece of machinery that the digital age is now exploiting.
We've established the Stone Age Foundation, a brain built for small, face-to-face, high-stakes interactions. Now we jump forward. If human history is a 100-minute movie, The internet arrived in the last millisecond, radically changing the physical and social landscape.
Mm-hmm.
The shift in scale and distance is truly what defines the Anthropocene from his psychological perspective.
It is the paradigm shift. Prior to the internet, communication systems, even global ones like telegraph or telephone connected individuals one-to-one or mass media connected one-to-many, the internet is the first technology that allows for connections of the many to the many with zero concern for time or physical distance.
Creating an entirely new environment.
An environment not shaped by physical geography or climate, but wholly created by human beings and the algorithms that govern their interactions.
And this environment immediately exposes our core problem. The evolutionary mismatch. Our specialized, domain-specific psychological architecture, adapted for the intimacy and manageable scale of the EEA, is profoundly ill-suited to navigate the modern online world.
That is the essential diagnosis. The mind, adapted to solve problems within a community of 150 people, is now attempting to process a global community of billions. This scale exposes us to an unnaturally large quantity of extreme moral content.
Okay, what do you mean by moral content?
Think of our evolved moral dispositions, our instinct to attend to threats, moral transgressions, and in-group loyalty tests. These systems are perpetually triggered because the sheer volume and intensity of morally relevant stimuli online are astronomical. We see more moral outrage in a single hour of scrolling than our ancestors might have encountered in a lifetime.
This sounds like the supernormal stimulus concept applied to our moral machinery. The online world is simply a stronger, faker signal that hijacks our attention.
That analogy holds up perfectly. A supernormal stimulus is an exaggerated, artificial version of a natural trigger, one that is far more potent than the original. We look at the South African jewel beetle example.
That'll be your bottle one.
The beer bottle one. The males are designed to respond to the shiny, pitted outer casing of the female beetle. When humans introduced beer bottles, which are shinier, more pitted, and larger than the females, the males abandoned reproduction and tried to mate with the bottles instead. The bottle provides a supernormal signal that overloads their evolved attention system.
So the moral and emotional drama online is our beer bottle. It's an exaggerated artificial signal that our brain cannot ignore, even if engaging with it is maladaptive.
Precisely. The outrage, the moral extremity, the immediate high-stakes tribal conflicts, these are the shiny, pitted, attention-grabbing supernormal stimuli designed to trigger our moral outrage and alliance tracking systems. Algorithms quickly learn what keeps eyes on the screen, and what keeps eyes on the screen is moral danger and tribal conflict.
And this drives the attention economy. Moral emotional language is the currency.
It's the engine. Content infused with moral and emotional language is far more likely to be shared, retweeted, and engaged with, regardless of its factual basis or nuance. Whether the content comes from laypeople or political elites, the system rewards moral extremity. But we need to pause on where this extremity originates because it's not evenly distributed.
This is a key point. The source notes that the polarization is actually driven by a production asymmetry, meaning the average user isn't the problem, but they perceive a skewed reality.
Yes. The polarization we observe is largely driven by a small, highly active, and highly extreme minority. Data on platforms like Twitter X showed that 97% of political posts often come from just 10% of users. These are the power users, and they tend to hold more extreme views. This highly active subset floods the online environment.
Okay, let's unpack this information summation error. If I only see the loudest, most extreme voices, I assume that's the norm.
That's exactly the cognitive trap. It's called an information summation error. The average user engages in ensemble coding. They take the average of the stimuli they're exposed to in their feed. If your feed, thanks to algorithms, is constantly feeding you the most extreme exemplars of political opinion, you start to perceive those extreme political views as the false norm.
So I start to think everyone on the other side is a radical monster.
You wrongly assume that the typical Democrat or Republican is as angry, as rigid, and as unforgiving as the most vocal 10% you see online. This drives real-world behavior because you tailor your own rhetoric to match this falsely perceived norm.
And we participate in this amplification through our own selection biases, specifically acrophily. What's that?
That's the second behavior that exacerbates the problem. We actively choose the environment that leads to the error. People engage in homophily, connecting with ideologically similar individuals, but then they also engage in acrophily, where they choose to connect with and follow those who share their ideology but are slightly more extreme than themselves.
So it's like an aspirational extremism.
Exactly. It's a desire to align with the sharpest edge of the tribe's identity.
So if I'm a moderate member of Group A, But I start following the 5 most extreme voices in Group A because they seem charismatic or successful. I'm contributing to my own radicalization.
That's the mechanism. This results in social networks being flooded with opinions that are disproportionately extreme compared to real-world face-to-face averages. The algorithms, built to maximize engagement, learn that this extreme content is the most successful at garnering clicks and reactions, thus prioritizing and amplifying it further, creating a dangerous feedback loop where the loudest, most radical voices are perceived as the most representative. This mismatch between the scale and distance of the internet and our evolved instincts for compassion and punishment fundamentally disrupt their adaptive functions. We see this breakdown manifesting in 4 key maladaptive outcomes.
Okay, starting with scale and compassion, leading to compassion fatigue. Our small group empathy system cannot cope with global suffering delivered 24/7.
The human compassion system evolved to respond intensely to the immediate visible suffering of 1 or 2 in-group members. A child starving in your camp, a family member injured in a raid. That kind of response is costly, requiring resources, time, and emotional energy.
But now it's a fire hose.
It's a fire hose. The online world subjects us to a constant, overwhelming barrage. Research shows that people are significantly more likely to learn secondhand about an immoral event, from a tragedy in a distant country to a personal failing of a stranger, in an online context than from print, radio, and TV combined.
The system is simply overloaded.
And
when it's overloaded, it shuts down or reroutes.
Exactly. The human brain has an emotional bandwidth limit. When we are exposed to suffering on the scale of global news famine, war, political oppression, the emotional system designed for small-scale tragedy experiences a systemic shutdown.
Which brings us back to the opening story.
This is where we loop back to your opening anecdote. The user celebrating Charlie Kirk's tragedy. When the brain is presented with a tragedy involving a political opponent, it treats the screen like a prehistoric clearing where loyalty to the pack is paramount.
The instantaneous tribal reward, the dopamine hit from likes and affirmation, overrides the genuine empathy.
The cost-benefit analysis is instantaneous and subconscious. Genuine empathy for a political opponent is cognitively difficult, emotionally painful, and offers 0 social reward from your in-group online. However, performing tribal loyalty, posting the cheers emoji, calling the victim a monster, is low cost and yields immediate, powerful social currency.
The likes, the shares, the affirmation.
The brain prioritizes the low-cost social fitness signal over the complex, costly, and painful instinct of genuine empathy. The ancient machinery is optimized for group survival, and in this context, group survival means affirming the destruction of the opponent. Next, let's consider the combination of scale and punishment resulting in the massive campaigns of public shaming we see daily. The core impulse to punish transgressors remains, but the context has been fatally compromised.
Historically, punishment was administered by people who had a direct stake in the outcome. If a tribe member stole resources, everyone in that small group suffered, so their punishment was justified for future cooperation.
That stake is what kept the punishment tethered to restoration and cooperation. Online, that stake vanishes. The critical failure is scale. Millions of third-party observers, geographically spread apart, can suddenly gather to punish one individual.
And they have no personal investment.
No personal investment in the outcome, nor any genuine need to ensure the future cooperation of the transgressor. They will never work or live with that person.
So the goal shifts from restorative justice or rehabilitation to pure low-cost retribution.
Absolutely. This massive third-party collective punishment results in campaigns of retribution doxing, job loss, reputation destruction that are often wildly disproportionate to the original transgression. This new form of shaming is focused purely on exacting maximal pain, not on fostering group cooperation. It is a functional failure of the evolved mechanism, using the tool of collective punishment to signal righteousness without the burden of real-world community responsibility.
Moving on to the interaction of distance and punishment, we encounter virtue signaling. Since the physical distance is so great and the screen acts as a shield, the cost of punishing a stranger is near 0.
And that cheapness is precisely why the signal fails. Remember, the original evolutionary function of altruistic punishment was that it was costly. You risked resources or retaliation to police the group, which proved your trustworthiness. When sending a critical tweet or joining a mob is low risk, that action does not function as an effective signal of group commitment. It's cheap talk.
It becomes selfish virtue signaling, a public performance designed to enhance one's own moral reputation without having to exemplify that virtue in a costly, meaningful way.
We see this played out vividly in political contexts. You can have a journalist who challenges his own political party's handling of a crisis. His logic is sound, his moral position defensible, yet his tribe turns on him viciously. Why?
Because he broke ranks.
Because on a subconscious level, the brain calculated that maintaining social status and loyalty to the in-group reputation management was far more valuable than being objectively right or even morally consistent with universal values. His was a costly signal he was breaking ranks, and the group punished him severely to maintain boundary integrity.
Meanwhile, the people costlessly attacking him were boosting their own status. But you suggested there's an irony. This cheap outrage can have the inverse effect of its evolved function.
It does. Because observers are now saturated with high-volume, costless outrage, they become highly cynical. They stop viewing the outrage as genuine moral commitment and start viewing the punishers as bullies seeking easy social rewards.
So it can backfire.
Studies show that this can lead to people sympathizing more with the original transgressor than with the mob, reducing trust in the punishers, and fostering widespread cynicism about the entire moral discourse. The very mechanism designed to reinforce group morality now actively undermines it. Finally, let's look at distance and compassion, which combine to produce ineffective collective action. The internet is undeniably powerful at raising broad awareness quickly. Think of the Arab Spring movements or the global reach of Black Lives Matter protests.
Right, it gives suppressed voices a platform they never had before.
It does. But the sources suggest that massive awareness doesn't translate into successful political outcomes.
Which is the tragedy of it.
That is the tragedy of the mismatch. While social media-driven nonviolent protests often achieve impressive scale, they are frequently larger than historical movements, they have resulted in significantly less policy change. This lack of conversion from awareness to action is tied directly to the increased psychological distance between online activists.
What do you mean by psychological distance?
They feel connected to the cause, but they are not physically co-located and therefore lack the deeply rooted face-to-face trust necessary for sustained, difficult collective action.
It fosters broad but shallow interest. A mile wide, an inch deep.
Precisely. You get millions of clicks, but few people willing to engage in costly, sustained local organizing or real-world sacrifice. This shallow involvement leads to eventual stagnation and cynicism about the movement's efficacy, as the moral energy is spent on low-cost digital signaling rather than high-cost local mobilization.
To really grasp the speed of this change, let's go back to that analogy of the 100-minute human movie, the entire existence of the genus Homo.
The analogy is crucial for understanding why we feel so disoriented. In that 100-minute movie, minute 1 is when Homo evolves. Very quickly, camp life begins. 20 to 30 adults, based on central place provisioning, deep sharing, and constant proximity.
And that model dominates almost the entire movie.
That highly cooperative, intentional camp structure dominates 99% of human history. Our psychology is finely tuned to that environment.
Then, in the last split second of the movie, the environment fundamentally changes.
We abandon the camp structure. We enter the era of manufactured isolation, exemplified by suburban living. Think of mass-manufactured communities like Levittown, invented in the 1950s. This was an anti-community community designed specifically to maximize privacy and prevent the kind of organic social congregation, veterans gathering, talking politics, organizing labor that happens in intentional communities.
So the whole design was to separate people.
Exactly. The core social unit becomes the nuclear family, geographically and psychologically separated from the larger intentional community. This sets up mismatch front 1, the nuclear camp mismatch, leading to the loneliness epidemic.
The science of loneliness is no longer an anecdote. It's a major public health crisis, especially in what we call weird societies, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic zones.
Yes. The mind, adapted for constant intentional community, is being starved of it.
And there are real physical consequences.
The physiological consequences of this starvation are massive and measurable. Loneliness is as damaging to health as smoking and is predictive of increased morbidity and mortality. When the brain senses isolation, the perceived failure of the social suite, it activates a deep evolutionary alarm system.
What does that do to the body?
This loneliness is predictive of increased antisocial behavior and, physiologically, reduces neuroplasticity, making it harder for the adult brain to learn, adapt, and change opinions.
We're talking about chronic stress.
Precisely. It leads to increased baseline stress, which forces the continual upregulation of anti-inflammatory markers. We are literally physically suffering because our psychological need for community is not being met. And research shows that this burden can be particularly acute for men later in life, who often rely on structured environments like work for social connection and tend to form fewer, deep, intimate social ties early on.
So when that structure is gone.
When those structures disappear, the vulnerability to isolation is heightened.
But the sources also offer a tangible proof of concept, showing the profound protective effect of small, intentional community structure, a story I love. The Rosetta Mystery.
Rosetta, Pennsylvania in the 1950s was a remarkable epidemiological outlier. Doctors discovered that this small town exhibited near non-existent heart disease, virtually no recorded suicides, extremely low crime rates, and almost no alcoholism.
All despite having a pretty unhealthy lifestyle, right?
Exactly. They engaged in traditional high-risk behaviors like a high-fat diet and smoking.
So scientists investigated to find the cause, ruling out the usual suspects.
They eliminated genetics, diet, and exercise as the primary protective factors. The answer was purely social, the Rosetta social network. The community was extremely stable, numbering 1,676 people, which again is roughly the theoretical average maximum size of a successful hunter-gatherer tribe.
The number keeps coming up.
It does. They were overwhelmingly cohesive, with one major religion, 22 civic organizations, and very high family reliance. A staggering 70% of subjects reported turning to their family, not external state mechanisms, to solve problems. This study demonstrates the profound physical protective power of living in the environment our brains are actually adapted for: small, intentional, cohesive community life. Now we layer mismatch front 2 onto this, the tribal ideological mismatch. Today, ideology has co-opted the role of the primary threat. It serves as the ultimate tribal loyalty test. We are witnessing ideology shaping biology polarization so extreme that studies analyzing voting patterns in the House of Representatives suggest that the two political parties look like two species diverging.
Two species diverging, that's a powerful image.
Since the 1970s, the clustering of personal realities into two homogenized camps has accelerated rapidly.
This clustering is intense. For instance, the data is showing that over 90% of Republicans are to the right of the median Democrat, and over 90% of Democrats are to the left of the median Republican. The middle ground simply doesn't exist anymore.
When conflict reaches this intensity, the brain's evolved response is triggered. It becomes harder to see opponents as complex individuals. They are reduced to just them, an abstract enemy, and the conversation is over.
And your main goal becomes just showing you're a loyal member of the tribe.
Our primary motivation ceases to be intellectual honesty or evidence-based reasoning. We start prioritizing the immediate, powerful desire to be seen as a good, loyal member of our tribe.
And this is where the brain's thrifty shortcuts lead to dangerous dehumanization, specifically through the weaponization of the disgust response.
The disgust connection is a fundamental example of how evolution co-opted an ancient mechanism. Think about the instinctual disgust response, the vivid thought of the cockroach crawling towards your mouth. This is a core survival mechanism designed to protect us from pathogens and toxins.
It's visceral.
It's visceral. Physiologically, it lights up the insular cortex and the amygdala, signaling the need for expulsion or avoidance.
So it's a non-negotiable survival alarm.
Exactly. But evolution recognized the utility of this powerful, immediate rejection system and co-opted it. The exact same part of the brain lights up when we perceive a social norm violation or a violation of moral purity.
So my brain treats a political idea I hate like a literal pathogen.
When you view a political enemy and feel that surge of visceral disgust, your brain is literally categorizing their ideology, their beliefs, and their personhood as a pathogen, a toxin that must be expelled.
That is a terrifying shortcut, especially in the context of the online world amplifying this sense of ideological toxicity.
It is the prerequisite for all large-scale organized cruelty. When political conflict is high and the rhetoric is dominated by language that frames political enemies as disgusting vermin, cockroaches, or rats, our brain is enacting the first clear trend that precedes genocide. The focus on arbitrary ideological differences becomes a way to activate that primal xenophobia, which, at its extreme, undermines the normal human inhibitions against killing out-group strangers. The tribal trap is set when we allow the political jersey to trigger the same ancient fight-or-flight response as a physical threat.
If the problem is an evolutionary mismatch, a Stone Age mind in a Space Age environment, then the solution cannot be to simply wait for evolution to catch up. We must deliberately introduce new structures and mechanisms to support the community life our minds are adapted for. We need camp crafting for the 21st century.
The goal is not to live like Luddites, but to be intentional about where we invest our social capital. We must harness the best of our evolved social suite, our capacity for cooperation, fairness, and deep trust, and purposefully merge it with modern technology and innovation.
Which takes real work.
This requires significant intentionality and energy because the current environment rewards the opposite.
The organizing principle here must be the principle of intentional proximity. We have to actively move closer to one another physically and psychologically.
Any step that shores up the local face-to-face community is a positive step toward psychological health. Think again about the Hadza hunter-gatherers. The science shows a literal stress response, measurable as cortisol rising when they step outside the camp's earshot, a zone of about half a square kilometer.
And it drops as soon as they're back.
The stress melts away when they return. That small radius is the evolutionary comfort zone.
So we need modern co-location models that bring back that passive, everyday interaction we lost in the isolating suburbs.
Contemporary examples prove this is possible. In Toronto, the Dailies and True Axis families recognized that single-family home ownership was economically isolating, so they chose to share a home. They achieved economic efficiency alongside social wellness, consciously engineering a high heart-to-heart ratio that provided constant passive social benefits.
That accidental, spontaneous interaction our brains crave.
Exactly. Another excellent example is Besties Row in Texas, where 4 families built small, individual, eco-friendly homes, but invested heavily in a shared hearth, a communal home where they cook, raise children, and socialize together. These models demonstrate a conscious prioritization of the intentional community over suburban independence.
But intentional groups always hit the same snag. How do you govern them? How do you keep the tribe cohesive and functional without descending into chaos or tyranny?
This is where we bring in the work of Nobel laureate Elinor Ostrom, who studied how groups successfully manage common pool resources. Her research is adapted into the pro-social framework, which provides core design principles, or CDPs, for making small group cooperation successful.
We need practical examples of those CDPs in action for modern camp crafting.
The framework stresses several key components. First, focusing on shared purpose and identity. Everyone must know why they are together. Second, establishing equitable distribution of costs and benefits. No one can feel like they're doing all the work.
Peer-based monitoring is a big one.
Third, and critically, utilizing peer-based monitoring. In a modern context, this doesn't mean surveillance. It means establishing clear, visible metrics of contribution and having open forums where group members can gently and fairly call out deviations from the shared rules.
And resolving conflict quickly.
Fourth, ensuring fast and fair conflict resolution, because conflict is inevitable. You must have a process to resolve disagreements before they fester and cause schism, which is a key threat to small intentional groups.
And underlying all of this governance is the power of ritual to solidify identity and prevent value drift.
Ritual is vital for group cohesion. It's how we standardize, symbolize, and reify the sacred values of the group, translating abstract principles into shared physical practice. The pro-social framework uses tools like the ACT matrix to help groups clarify their values, identify toward behaviors that move them toward their purpose, and identify the away behaviors, the inner thoughts and feelings that hold them back, such as fears of interpersonal differences or the simple instinct to be cynical. This intentional process is essential for solidifying identity and purpose, ensuring the group remains functional and resilient. The ultimate moral quest in this new, fragmented environment is a personal one: understanding our allegiance. This leads to the concept of the identity stack, the ranked weighting of identities within each individual. What is the identity that supersedes all others?
If the abstract digital tribe is at the top of my stack, then I am inherently vulnerable to the mismatch and manipulation we discussed.
That's the vulnerability. Research with students shows this problem clearly. A surprising number of undergraduates identify primarily with abstract tribal groups: a political party, a national identity, or a broad ideological cause, and not with their immediate face-to-face community groups.
Their primary loyalty is external and abstract.
Which means when the abstract tribe demands hatred, the local connections don't stand a chance.
So the solution is not to destroy all other identities, but to reweight the identity stack back toward the local and the physical.
Exactly. The challenge is to make identity specific and proximate. Instead of identifying abstractly as Roman Catholic, you consciously prioritize the identification of Roman Catholic at the local community church off of Main and Sanford, focusing on the people you shake hands with.
Instead of just Democrat.
You identify as a Democrat in my specific neighborhood working on the local school board. This realignment of identity toward the community level is the antidote to the evolutionary mismatch. It prioritizes the people you actually rely on and interact with, the real-world social suite. Your primary identity is precious, the one allegiance that supersedes all others, and we must consciously and intentionally decide what we allow to claim that spot, lest the digital mob claim it by default.
We began with that shocking digital anecdote of dehumanization, the cheering for violence against an opponent, and we've traced its root not to some inherent moral decay of the modern human, but to our evolutionary need for small-scale tribal cooperation. We saw how the internet's supernormal scale and distance exploit that instinct, creating cheap outrage, driving compassion fatigue, and amplifying false extreme norms. Our journey concludes with the understanding that reclaiming our humanity and psychological balance requires intentionally prioritizing the physical local community over the sprawling abstract digital tribe.
And we must conclude by reinforcing that the evolution of moral virtues is profoundly biological and personal. Traits like kindness, fidelity, magnanimity, and heroism are not simply adaptive for maintaining group cohesion. They are also powerful, sexually attractive, costly signals.
So being a good person made you a more attractive mate.
When our ancestors demonstrated costly virtues, risking life for the group, showing unflinching honesty, it advertised superior genetic quality, robust parenting abilities, and partner reliability. The very act of performing costly virtue conferred high social status and enhanced sexual benefits. Even the ability to impose altruistic punishment, to punish the wicked at a personal cost, is seen as virtuous, socially status-enhancing, and therefore sexually attractive, signaling capability and control.
The profound connection between morality and our deepest biological drives is made crystal clear by the fact that the leading causes of divorce across cultures, infidelity, abuse, addiction, and unemployment, are almost all failures of moral character or reliability. This shows that our morality is deeply personal, deeply biological, and tied directly to our reproductive success and long-term well-being, not just a matter of external political alignment. Understanding this duality, our primal capacity for both intense in-group cooperation and fierce intergroup hatred, is the crucial first step in navigating and shaping our new environment to prevent these maladaptive outcomes from destroying the very thing that makes us human.